Hello once again, everyone. I'm Germain, host of INFOcus, People and Places here at MCTV, and welcome in. Thanks for tuning in today. Great show lined up for you. We have David Andrews, who is the Director of Development and Community Relations for CSAC, Counseling Service of Addison County. David, welcome in.
Thank you for inviting me.
Today's sort of an overview program, and we don't want to bore people and drive them away, but this is an overview of the organization. We're going to get a little technical here, so show some charts and whatnot, but you also have some exciting news, exciting plans.
Where would you like to start, with the boring or the exciting?
Let me see here. Well, first of all, talk a little bit about your job with CSAC.
Okay. Well, as Development Director, I work in fundraising, and as Community Relations Director, I work in public information, getting the word out about what we do, sending out press releases.
You're a PR person.
A PR person, that's right, that's right. So it's the two things are not unrelated. It's always good to have people know what you're doing when you ask for their support.
And I would think, and we'll get into this a little bit more, David, and we'll see if you agree with me or not, that there's probably, people, when they hear about CSAC, counseling service, they of course think about, the mentally ill. They think about therapists. They think about, somebody laying on a couch. That kind of.
Yes.
Most
of our offices are too small to have couches.
But
yes.
I think a lot of people probably already have their minds made up about that kind of thing. So it's probably, it's a good challenge for you to get out what your organization is really about.
Sometimes we think maybe our name isn't as accurate a representation of what we do as it might be. We haven't been able to come up with a better one yet, but the whole idea of counseling for many people suggests an hour spent sitting across from a therapist talking about whatever issues a person may have, often family issues if somebody's going through a divorce or feeling depressed or whatever. And we certainly do some of that kind of counseling, some of that psychotherapy in quotes. But we also do a whole lot of other things, including a lot of work with people who have chronic needs, either because they're suffering from what we call a severe and persistent mental illness, someone who may have schizophrenia or some condition that just doesn't go away. It can be kept somewhat under control using medications and with a lot of supports, but it doesn't go away. And the same is true with some developmental disabilities, which formerly might have been called mental retardation. We tend to use developmental disability because it's a little more inclusive, includes some other things like autism and some other issues that affect people's ability to function independently in the world. There's been a big change over the past 20 or 30 years in terms of the way people with both developmental disabilities and severe mental illness have been cared for in our society. Prior to 30 years ago, many of these people would have been in institutional settings. The state hospital here in Waterbury, Vermont would have had a population of many hundred people, and now it has about 40 to 50. So the people who would have been hospitalized probably for most of their lives are now mainstreamed into the community, receiving supports from our agency and other agencies like ours in other counties. And then for people with developmental disabilities, the Brandon Training School was a similar facility that had a very large population as well. Now that has completely closed, so that there are a lot of our fellow citizens with these special needs who are now in our midst, and they are able to be in our midst because of the programs that we offer.
And we almost had, I guess, at least some of those patients come to Addison County.
There was a proposal about a year ago for a facility in Vergennes, which would have been a step-down facility for people who had been at the Waterbury State Hospital, which we hope will be moving somewhere else in the not too distant future. And we anticipated a facility that would perhaps have 7 or 8 of the people who had been in the state hospital and were preparing to return to their communities. There were various problems with that proposal, and it wasn't received with great excitement by the people in Vergennes. And I think we finally came to the conclusion that without a little more support from that community, we would be ill-advised to proceed. So as of now, I think there's a similar facility being opened in Williamstown, Vermont. So the state has moved ahead with one such project.
With that Virgin story in our minds, David, do you think that perhaps a little bit of it could be from just people that didn't have the right information? They really were not, they weren't understanding correctly the whole world that you talk about with CSAC?
Yeah, I think there's some of that. I think there is a fear factor.
Some misconceptions.
With people, particularly people whose mental illnesses are severe enough to require hospitalization. I think there were some folks who were a little concerned about what these people would be like as they mingled around in the community of Virgins. And frankly, Virgins has been heavily impacted by the Job Corps Center and has had some issues with the state in terms of the reimbursement in lieu of property taxes. And even though we assured Virgins that we would pay full property taxes on this project, I think there was an element of distrust of the state that was operating. So we've moved on, and the state's moved on to some other possibilities. But it does point up the need for us always to be trying to help people in our communities understand the nature of mental illness and what the current approaches are to helping people. Because there's a lot of progress that's been made, medication being one of the major ones.
Is there a quote-unquote typical CSAC client, patient?
I don't think there's a typical one. I can think of a number of different typical ones. Actually, if one were to talk about typical in terms of the largest number, it would probably be a child. Because we have programs with school-based mental health clinicians in all of the schools in Addison County. And we also have programs in our own agency setting for children and adolescents and families. So as we look at our total caseload, the total number of people we serve, I'm sure that children, adolescents, and families would be the largest single group. And we regard that as a very important part of our program, because if we can help young people address whatever issues they're facing in terms of their own mental health and their relationships with their parents and their families, if we can help them deal with that now, we can also head off a lot of other problems that may develop later, notably serious substance abuse problems, which tends to be a major problem for kids who don't get their issues figured out.
Well, if there isn't a typical client, is there a typical illness that you deal with? Depression, you mentioned drugs.
I suspect depression, substance abuse would probably be, maybe anxiety disorders would probably be as common as any. For the people who have the most intense mental health issues, the severe and persistent mental illnesses, the people who we treat year in and year out for most of their lives, I'm sure for them it would be schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, particularly schizophrenia, because bipolar disorder is quite treatable with medication, and for many of the people who suffer from it. But those would probably be as common as any among that clientele.
And I was just going to ask you, you mentioned the use of medication there. Is that the best way? And I'm sure that you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Definitely.
But medication, I mean, can therapy help, or a combination of the two? What is the normal procedure, if there is one?
Well, again, I think it depends on the severity of the situation. I think, and I'm not a psychiatrist, and we should probably schedule a session in the future with a psychiatrist, because we have two wonderful psychiatrists on staff, Bob Jimerson, who does most of our adults, and Robin Lessoff-Perry, who's a child psychiatrist, and we're very lucky to have a full-time child psychiatrist. I think for people who are dealing with depression and just general family crises, using medication early on would probably not be the normal protocol. It would be more appropriate to sit down and have some sessions of talk therapy and find out what's going on. And then perhaps after that, there'd be a need for some medication in conjunction with the the vocal, verbal psychotherapy.
Right.
For people with really severe mental illness, I think in almost every case, medication is a big part of the treatment. And the kinds of sort of person-to-person treatments that we would be offering would not be so much designed to cure people through psychotherapy as to support them in their life skills development and coping with whatever they're facing in terms of housing, how to maintain themselves in an apartment, how to manage their money, things like that. These are all issues of sort of living in the community that we try to support people with.
And you have different offshoots as well. Are you associated with places like the Evergreen House, Community Associates?
Yes, those are all parts of our program. Yes, Evergreen House is a day center for people with severe and persistent mental illness, so that some of the people who either would have been hospitalized or may have been hospitalized in the past have a place here in town where they can go every day to spend time with each other and with some clinicians and support people. It's kind of a clubhouse, but it's a clubhouse with an emphasis on the concept of recovery, working through issues to try to become more whole and together. And that's the message that people who attend Evergreen House receive day in and day out, and with a whole lot of support and love and friendship. It's a wonderful place. You mentioned Community Associates. That's the name of our entire program for developmental issues. And again, these are people who tend to be chronically in relationship to the counseling service. People who might have been at the Brandon Training School if they're of a sufficient age, but other than that, they would be people who might have been in special education programs through the school and through the DO program, Diversified Occupations program at the Hannaford Center, and then they reach adulthood at a point when they're no longer appropriately the total concern of their family of origin, and then at that point they would be picked up as clients of Community Associates and receive support through that program. And that program also includes employment services. We have a branch of Community Associates called Employment Associates, and I'm sure that your viewers have observed people working in jobs around the community, local supermarkets, Middlebury College, a number of employers who have been willing to hire folks with these developmental disabilities who then receive support from staff members of our agency as they learn these jobs and then support as they carry on the jobs. Some people are essentially shadowed by a staff member of Employment Associates for a long time in a job. Other people learn the job and are able to do it pretty well without that kind of support.
Well, you kind of answered the question, I think, a little bit, but David, as way of sort of giving us some history, what was there for these people before there was CSAC?
Well, CSAC was actually founded in 1959, somewhat ahead of the curve in terms of the deinstitutionalization process, so that the counseling service was initially pretty much devoted to the kind of one-on-one psychotherapy that we still do some of, and also some substance abuse treatment, which we still do quite a bit of. And then as the deinstitutionalization process progressed, we developed the programs for supporting people in the community. And the program for the severely and persistently mentally ill is called Community Rehabilitation and Treatment. That's called CRT. We're great for acronyms at the Counseling Service, including our name, CSAC.
And on the screen right now, viewers will be seeing a little chart of the Counseling Service of Addison County, kind of breaking it down.
Right, yes.
And they'll see that Community Rehabilitation and Treatment.
Yes, and Community Associates for Developmentally Disabled, Adult Outpatient Services, which is the basic garden variety counseling that probably many people think is mainly what we do, but is actually a fairly small part. And then Youth and Family program, which covers all of the things we offer for children, adolescents, and families, including the school-based work. One exciting thing that's just happened this past fall is that we've actually opened our own school, high school and middle school program for youngsters, adolescents with severe enough mental and emotional difficulties so that they're not able to function well in the public schools. There's a small group of 8 to 10 adolescents at any given time who just have some issues that make it impossible for them to be with other students in a normal school setting.
Right.
And in the past, these kids have had to go outside of Addison County, largely to the Baird Center up in Burlington and one or two other programs. We were approached about a year and a half ago by the schools in the area to see if we would be willing to create a program to meet the needs of these kids. And so we are doing that, and it started in September. And right now, these students, most of them are out at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum building a longboat as part of their educational program. They also have class time out there at the museum, and there's an effort to relate the work of building a boat to the various disciplines in terms of history, history of Vermont, maritime history, math and physics, all of the things that go into this boat project.
They got to be loving that.
They're having a great time. In fact, I spent most of a day out there with them about 3 weeks ago, and they were steaming the ribs for this boat. And the museum has some wonderful staff and volunteers who are just really good at working with these kids. And then we have our staff there too.
And of course, you have emergency services.
Yes, and that's something we must not forget to mention. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there is a phone number which can be called by anyone who is in a state of crisis and needing some kind of attention. And we urge people to use that. You don't have to be suicidal to call that number. There can be all kinds of issues that might lead you to just feel that you're beyond your own resources. Certainly being suicidal or feeling suicidal would be one very good reason to call that number. And we maintain staff on call all the time to answer those calls, and if need be, to actually meet with people immediately, either in the emergency room at Porter Hospital or at our office, depending on time of day, or to just talk people through a crisis on the phone and maybe make arrangements for an office visit sometime in another day or two. We also receive calls from some people who are already our clients and deal with some of their issues through that emergency number. But we also receive calls from people that we've never had contact with before, and from family members and friends who may be concerned about something that doesn't seem quite right in the behavior of someone they care about, just to sort of get some help and a sense of what help is available.
Get their bearings again.
Yeah. And that's a program for which I do need to raise some money, because many of the services that are given through this emergency number are not services that we can actually charge anybody for.
I was going to say, where do you get most of your funding for all these programs?
Well, the great majority of it is actually from Medicaid, from federal Medicaid dollars that are funneled through the state of Vermont. Because of the deinstitutionalization, the state made the decision to have agencies like ours be designated providers of services to people with severe mental illness and developmental disabilities. So we have a contract with, or a number of contracts with the State of Vermont Agency of Human Services and Department of Health to provide services to this clientele. And in addition, a lot of the children's services are also covered by Medicaid, simply because many of the families are low income and they're covered by Dr. Dinosaur or VHAP, some of those programs. So I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of 80% of our income comes from Medicaid money, and then a smaller fraction from private insurance. A fairly small part of it from donations. We're a United Way agency, so we receive something like $22,000 a year to help with the deficit in our emergency services, and another small amount toward a program related to employment for people with developmental disabilities. And then I raise a certain amount of money from private donors for a couple of programs that are wonderful programs that need a little extra infusion of money. We have an equestrian riding program, therapeutic riding program for kids. And we have a summer forest program in conjunction with the U.S. Forest Service, where we send some teenagers with therapists up into the national forest to do trail clearing. And that program gives the kids a small stipend in return for their good work habits. So I raise the money for those stipends. But of course, my big project is this capital campaign that we're...
Yeah, let's talk about $650,000 and what that is all about.
Yes. Well, the counseling service had never tried to raise a large amount through a capital campaign before. But we realized that we were in serious need of some new and improved buildings. Because of the way the counseling service got started, sort of on a shoestring, we have tended to occupy buildings that were really intended for some other purpose and were available and relatively inexpensive. Our developmental program has been working out of an old house on Court Street at 61 Court Street that isn't really even at all handicapped accessible, which is a bit ironic considering the people we're trying to serve. So we came to the conclusion that we needed to do something about a new building for that program. And also our mental health programs, we were tending to build up kind of a long waiting list for people who weren't in extreme crisis. Sometimes people would have to wait, a month or two before they'd get an appointment. And it was largely that we just didn't have enough office space. So we have come up with a plan to spend some money on new facilities. And part of it will be a brand new building out in Catamount Park off of Exchange Street for the developmental programs, and I think you've got a picture in your collection there.
Yes.
That you can flash on the screen at some point of that. It'll be a two-story
Very
building.
impressive.
It'll be across the parking lot from a building that we built about 4 years ago where our administrative offices and youth and family programs are located. That building we were able to build without having a capital campaign because it was replacing rented space. But this new building is going to be providing new space and replacing a building that we already own that isn't really worth very much. So we decided in order to make this work financially for the agency, we needed to raise a portion of the cost from this capital campaign. So we're going out for $650,000 toward that project, plus some new space down at 89 Main Street, small addition on the back of that building.
And we should mention that as of the date of this filming,
yes,
hopefully it'll be complete by the time this airs.
Well,
you've got well over $530,000.
Yes,
raised
we're at about the 82% mark. We've been going at this campaign for almost 2 years now, and we've had some wonderful support from Middlebury College, from 2 of our local banks, from a number of individuals, from some civic groups, Rotary and Lions, and we're reaching out in all directions. And I think we're going to have this campaign complete. We hope it'll be complete by this summer. Probably this will air a little sooner than that. So if you can figure out a way for us to reach our goal by the time this program airs, we'll be more than happy. But it's been
construction. The
construction
plans?
will begin about a year from May, so 2008 is what we're hoping for. Yep.
All right. Very good.
And it'll be very exciting.
Are there other nuts and bolts kind of programs? I mean, the building is wonderful. That's going to help a great deal. But getting down to the nitty gritty, are there some other things that you folks would love to implement?
Well, I think we're always looking for ways to better meet the needs of the clients that we serve, and we know that there are needs that we're not able to meet. It has a lot to do with what funding is available, and frankly, the state of Vermont and the federal government have a tremendous amount of power over what we are able to do, and there are some challenges. We have a very wonderful elder care program offering mental health care to elderly people, but it doesn't pay for any services that are delivered to them in their homes. We have clinicians who are more than willing to go out and meet senior citizens in the commons or the meadows or in their own private homes, but in order to get those services reimbursed by, in this case, Medicare, the clients actually have to come into the office, and that's a major frustration. I think, given the aging of the population here in Addison County, there's only going to need to be more and more service, because there's a lot of depression, particularly, that afflicts people after they've experienced some of the losses that go with old age in any culture. and to be able to provide more service to people in their 70s and 80s who may be lonely, who've lost a spouse, people who are dealing with a lot of hard stuff.
Well, David, as we are winding things down here, we just have a couple of minutes left. Your quick thoughts on the impact that CSAC has had in its years of existence?
Well, I think it's been tremendous. It comes as a real surprise to many people to realize that we serve about 2,200 individual people in the course of a typical year.
Wow.
And that's a good, that's more than 5%, verging on 10% of the population of Addison County. And when it comes to kids, it's at least 10%. I think that we perform a tremendous service in dealing with problems which otherwise could lead to much bigger problems, including incarceration, particularly with some of the substance abuse issues. If we can help people get those under control so that they don't end up running afoul of the law and ending up increasing the corrections expenses, that's wonderful.
So it has certainly been helping.
I think it has.
David Andrews, Counseling Service of Addison County, keep up the great work. Best of luck on that capital campaign.
Thank you.
We look forward to that new building.
Yes, we all do.
And we want to remind folks that if you would like to replay this, if you missed any portion of it, tuned in late, and would like to hear my conversation with David Andrews from CSAC, all you need to do is go to our new website, which is INFOcusOnTV.com. You can download today's episode, past episodes, see a schedule of upcoming shows, and much, much more. So just go to that. That's INFOcusOnTV.com. And we will have a link as well to the CSAC website.
Great.
As well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry.
And that's going to do it for In Focus, People and Places here on MCTV for this time around. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care.